She transferred $47,000 into his account. She built his business from nothing. She worked for him for free, kept his books, hired his staff, and called herself his partner. And when he was done with her, he had an attorney send her a letter that called it all a gift. That was December 2013. She did not cry. She did not call a lawyer that night. She did not post anything. She did not tell a single person what she was planning. She opened a notebook, and for the next 11 years, while he built a life, fell in love, grew wealthy, and planned a wedding, she wrote everything down. Every transaction, every email, every lie, every date, every amount, page after patient page, year after year, in complete silence. And on the evening of his wedding, while he stood at the altar and made promises to another woman, Claire was sitting at table 11, in a green dress, eating salmon, watching him with a small smile on her face. Because she already knew what was coming. She had known for years. The only person in that room who did not know was him. There are moments in life that split everything into a before and an after. Moments so quiet on the outside that nobody around you even notices. You are sitting at a kitchen table. The lights are on. The refrigerator hums. And the person you love most in the world is sitting right across from you, looking you in the eye and lying. Not because they slipped, not because they panicked, but because they had been doing it for so long, it had stopped feeling like lying altogether. It had simply become their normal. And you had trusted them so completely, loved them so fully, built so much of your life around the version of them you believed in, that you could not see what was right in front of you until the night everything cracked open and the truth poured out like something that had been waiting behind a wall for years. This is the story of a woman named Claire. And what she did next is something that, even now, people who know the full story still struggle to believe. Not because it was violent, not because it was illegal, but because it required something that most of us, if we are honest with ourselves, simply do not have. Patience. Absolute, unshakable, years-long patience. And a willingness to wait until the exact right moment to collect what was owed. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let us go back to the beginning. It was the spring of 2010, and Claire was 25 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio, in a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that still had a leaky faucet she kept meaning to report and never quite got around to. She was, by every account, the kind of woman who showed up, not just in the easy ways, the birthday texts and the happy hours and the casual good mornings, but in the real ways, the call you at midnight ways, the drive across town in the rain ways. She had grown up the oldest of 3 children in a working-class family in Dayton, where her mother worked double shifts at a hospital and her father drove trucks across 3 states, sometimes gone for 2 weeks at a stretch. Claire had learned early what it meant to hold things together. She put herself through Ohio State on a combination of scholarships, a part-time job at a campus bookstore, and a second job waitressing on weekends. She graduated with honors, landed an entry-level position at a boutique financial services firm in Columbus, and by 24 had already been promoted once. She was organized in the way that people who grew up without a safety net tend to be organized, not out of perfectionism, but out of necessity. She kept a budget in a notebook. She had an emergency fund. She read her contracts before she signed them. She was the kind of woman who did not take things for granted because she had worked too hard for everything she had to treat any of it carelessly. And then, at a birthday party for a mutual friend on a Friday night in April of 2010, she met Marcus. His full name was Marcus Devin Hayes, and he was 29 years old, and he was, according to almost everyone who encountered him in those years, almost impossibly charming. Not in an obvious way. Not in the slick, too polished way that immediately puts your guard up. He was charming in the specific, dangerous way that feels like genuine warmth, the kind of charm that makes you feel seen rather than flattered. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered details. He showed up to that party in a gray blazer over a plain white shirt, holding a beer he barely touched, and he spent most of the evening standing in a corner talking to people like they were the most interesting person in the room. When he talked to Claire, He asked about her job, not in the small talk way, but in the curious way. Follow-up questions and everything. He grew up in Cincinnati, he told her. Middle child. Played basketball in high school but not well enough for college ball. Got his degree in business from Miami University of Ohio, worked a few years in corporate consulting, and was now, he said, in the early stages of launching something of his own. A consultancy, he called it, tech adjacent. He was vague about the details in the way that people who are genuinely excited about something often are, as if the idea is still too new and fragile to hand over to a stranger all at once. Claire told her friend about him the following Monday. She said, and these were her exact words, "He actually listens." They went on their first date 2 weeks later, a dinner at a small Italian place near German Village, and by the time the check came, Claire had already decided she liked him more than she had liked anyone in a long time. He was funny without trying too hard. He was honest about his ambitions without being arrogant about them. He told her about a difficult period in his mid-20s, a stretch where nothing seemed to work out, where he had made decisions he was not proud of, where he had felt genuinely lost. He did not dress it up. He did not make it a redemption arc. He just told her, plainly, that he had been through a hard time and come out the other side of it with a clearer sense of what he wanted. Claire found that honesty disarming. It made the rest of him feel more real. It made her lower a guard she had spent years building up. And in hindsight, in the particular, painful kind of hindsight that only arrives after everything has already gone wrong, that honesty may have been the most calculated thing about him. By the summer of 2010, they were seeing each other regularly. By the fall, they had settled into the kind of easy rhythm that feels, when you are inside it, like something you could build a life around. He spent most weekends at her apartment. They cooked together. They argued about movies and agreed about music and had a shorthand that took less than a year to develop. Her mother met him at Thanksgiving and called Claire afterward to say she liked him. Her college roommate, Destiny, who had seen Claire through 2 genuinely bad relationships, told her this one felt different. And it did feel different. It felt solid. It felt chosen. What Claire could not have known, what nobody around her could have known, was that the foundation of everything Marcus showed her had been built on a version of himself that was, in critical ways, carefully managed. He was charming because he knew how to be charming. He was attentive because attention was the currency he traded in. And the vulnerability he had shown her on that first date, the honest admission of a difficult past, the willingness to be imperfect, had been deployed, consciously or not, as a way of earning her trust at precisely the depth he was going to need it. In early 2011, Marcus began talking more seriously about his business idea. He had refined it by then into something more concrete, a management consultancy focused on helping mid-sized companies implement technology systems they did not have the internal capacity to build themselves. It was a real gap in the market. It was a genuinely good idea. He had already had 2 preliminary conversations with potential clients, he said. He had a name picked out. He had a logo concept. What he did not have was capital. He had savings, some, but not enough to cover the basic costs of incorporation, a professional website, liability insurance, initial operating expenses, and the few months of runway he would need before the first client retainer came in. He had looked into small business loans. The bank wanted more collateral than he had. He was exploring other options. Claire listened to all of this. She asked good questions. She looked at his numbers. She had a head for numbers. It was literally her job. And the numbers, rough as they were, made sense. The idea made sense. And Marcus made sense to her in a way that made it hard to separate the business from the person, because by then, in her mind, they were already the same thing. The conversation about money happened organically, which is often how the most consequential conversations happen, not as a formal proposal, but as a natural extension of a late-night discussion at her kitchen table, both of them in pajamas, a spreadsheet open on his laptop. Claire said she had some money set aside, savings she had been building since her first job, money she had earmarked vaguely for a down payment on a house someday, a someday that did not have a specific date attached to it. She could contribute some of it, she said, as a partner, not a gift, a contribution, a buy-in. Marcus looked at her across the table and said that he would never ask her to do that. That was the first thing he said, that he would never ask. And then, over the next hour, he allowed himself to be persuaded. There was no formal partnership agreement. They talked about drawing one up. Marcus said he would handle it. He knew a guy, a lawyer friend from college. He would have something put together. Claire, who knew better, who had literally been trained to read contracts, who kept a budget in a notebook, who had an emergency fund, let it go. She let it go because she trusted him. She let it go because they were together. Because people who love each other do not need paper between them. Because the arrangement felt more like sharing than transacting, and she did not want to make it transactional. Over the following 18 months, between the spring of 2011 and the fall of 2012, Claire transferred a total of $47,000 into a joint account she and Marcus had opened together. She did it in portions, $10,000 here, $8,000 there, a few smaller transfers in between. Always discussed, always framed as partnership contributions, always met with gratitude and plans, and the particular, quiet intimacy of two people building something together. Marcus incorporated the business in his name alone in the fall of 2011. He said it was simpler that way for tax purposes. The lawyer friend had recommended it, he said. Claire's name would be on the operating agreement, he said. He would take care of it. Claire nodded. She trusted him. She let it go again. The business launched in early 2012, and for a period of about 18 months, things actually went well. Marcus landed 2 clients in the first quarter. By mid-year, he had 4. Claire, who was still working full-time at the financial firm, had quietly taken on an unofficial role as his bookkeeper and financial advisor, unpaid, because it was their business, because it would all even out, because that is what partners do. She built his invoicing system. She designed the tracking spreadsheets he used for client reporting. She caught an accounting error in his first year that would have cost him a significant amount in incorrectly filed taxes. She was embedded in the operation in a way that any reasonable person observing from the outside would have described as co-foundership. Inside the business, Marcus referred to her that way. Employees, the 2 he eventually hired, knew who Claire was. They had heard him call her his partner. They had seen her in the office. She had interviewed one of them. The business was real, and her contribution to it was real. And for a time, the life they were building around it felt equally real. It was sometime in the middle of 2013 that Claire first noticed something shift. Not a specific moment, not a single event. More of an atmospheric change, a slight drop in temperature that you feel before you can name it. Marcus became less available. He was working late more often, he said. New client demands. She understood. She was busy herself. But the late nights started coming with less communication, less explanation. He was vaguer about where he had been. He checked his phone differently, turning the screen away in a way he had not before. She told herself she was imagining it. She was a person who prided herself on not being paranoid, on trusting the people she loved, and the idea that her instincts might be telling her something she did not want to hear felt more threatening than comforting. So she set the feeling aside. She focused on work. She focused on them, on the ordinary good parts of them that still existed, the dinners and the Sunday mornings, and the way he still reached for her hand when they were walking. She told herself that couples go through phases, that business stress was real, that distance was sometimes temporary. She was wrong about all of it. In December of 2013, on a Tuesday evening, Claire came home from work early with a headache. Marcus had told her that morning he would be in back-to-back client meetings until at least 7. She took 2 ibuprofen, lay down on the couch and fell asleep. When she woke up, it was just after 6, and something made her pick up her laptop. Not a specific reason, not a specific suspicion, just the particular restlessness of a woman who had been setting aside an uneasy feeling for months, and whose body had decided, on that Tuesday evening, that it was done waiting. She opened their joint account, the one they had opened for the business, the one through which she had transferred the bulk of her contributions. She looked at the transaction history, and there it was, sitting in the middle of the activity, like something that had been there the whole time, waiting for her to look. A series of transfers she did not recognize, moving money from the joint account into a secondary account she had never heard of, under a name she did not know. Not large amounts individually, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, small enough to pass unnoticed in the normal run of things, large enough, added together over the months she now started scrolling back through, to represent a pattern, a deliberate, patient, consistent pattern. She did not stop there. She had a head for numbers and a professional's instinct for following a thread, and so she followed it. She pulled up the business accounts. She still had access. She was still the de facto bookkeeper, and she went through them with the same systematic focus she brought to everything she did professionally. What she found over the next 2 hours, sitting alone on that couch with her headache forgotten and a cold cup of tea going untouched beside her, was not just financial irregularity. It was a second life, documented in transactions. Hotel charges on nights he had told her he was working. Restaurant bills for two on evenings she had spent alone. A jewelry purchase, $3,200, from a store in the short north. That was not a piece of jewelry she had ever received. The name on the secondary account was one she did not recognize. But she found the name again in his email. She still had access to the shared business account through which some of his correspondence passed, and the name belonged to a woman named Vanessa. And Vanessa, it became clear within the span of 15 more minutes of looking, was not a client, not a colleague, not a vendor. Vanessa was a woman Marcus had been seeing for the better part of a year. Claire sat very still for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The light in the apartment had gone orange with evening. She thought about calling someone. Destiny, her sister, her mother, and she decided not to. Not yet. She needed to think. She needed to be very clear about what she knew and what she could prove before she said a single word to anyone, including Marcus. That quality, the capacity to be devastated and strategic at the same time, was something most people do not have. Most people, in that moment, would have called someone, would have cried, would have done something reactive, something human, something that could be walked back or minimized later. Claire did none of those things. She opened a new document on her laptop. She started making a list. She was still making it when she heard Marcus's key in the lock just after 9 o'clock. She closed the laptop. She waited. She let him come in, take off his coat, pour himself a glass of water, and ask her how her day was. And then she looked at him and she said, very quietly, "We need to talk about the money." What happened in that conversation was, according to Claire, almost absurdly calm. Marcus denied nothing, not because he had a sudden attack of conscience, but because the evidence she laid out was too specific and too thorough to deny. He admitted the transfers. He admitted the relationship with Vanessa. He told her he was sorry. He told her things had been complicated. He used the word complicated in the way that people use it when they mean, I did what I wanted and I do not have a better explanation. Claire told him she wanted everything that was hers returned. She was specific. She said $47,000, the total of her contributions to the business, plus documentation acknowledging her co-founder role. Marcus said he would need time. He said they needed to talk about it properly, with clear heads, when emotions were not running so high. Claire said fine. She slept in her own bed. She did not cry until she was in the shower the next morning, with the water running loud enough that nobody could hear her, and then she cried hard and fast and completely, and by the time the water went cold, she had stopped. She got out. She got dressed. She went to work. Within a week, it was over between them. Within a month, Marcus had consulted an attorney. Within 6 weeks of that December night, Claire received a letter from a law firm on the north side of Columbus, informing her, in careful and professional language, that her financial contributions to the business had been made in the context of a personal relationship and were legally classifiable as gifts. That without a formal partnership agreement, which did not exist, she had no documented equity stake in the business. That any further communication regarding a financial claim should be directed to the firm. Claire read the letter 3 times. She set it down on her kitchen table. She picked up her phone and called a lawyer. Then she called a second lawyer, then a third. The first attorney told her she might have a case, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally brutal. And given the lack of a formal agreement, the outcome was far from guaranteed. The second attorney said largely the same thing and added that in his experience, people in her situation often spent more fighting than they recovered. The third attorney was a woman named Patricia, about 15 years older than Claire, with a small practice that specialized in civil fraud and unjust enrichment claims. Patricia told Claire something the other two had not, that the law, in cases where one party has clearly and documentably benefited from another's contributions without providing fair compensation, can and does impose what is called an implied partnership, even without a written agreement. That emails, bank records, voicemails, internal business documentation, and witness testimony could collectively establish that an informal agreement existed and was violated, that the case was difficult but not impossible, that it would take time, and that the window for filing was not closed. Depending on how the discovery of fraud was classified, the statute of limitations might not even have begun running yet. Claire asked Patricia how long it might take to build a case strong enough to win. Patricia said, "It depends on what you can find and how patient you are willing to be." Claire said, "I am very patient." Patricia said, "Then we might have something." And that was where the story most people know ends. A woman was wronged by a man she loved. She consulted lawyers. The law offered her some hope, but no promises. She was 28 years old, heartbroken, out $47,000, and facing a system that was telling her, gently but clearly, that the price of trusting someone without paperwork was a very steep one. For most people, that is where the story ends. You grieve, you recover, you move on, you warn your friends, you try not to make the same mistake again. But Claire did not move on. At least, not in the way that word usually means. What she did instead was something far more deliberate. She made a decision, sitting alone in her apartment in January of 2014, that she was not going to spend the next several years of her life in active, consuming, daily rage. She was not going to let Marcus Hayes occupy the center of her emotional life while she waited for a legal process that might take years and might not succeed. She was going to live, she was going to work, she was going to build, and she was going to document everything, carefully and continuously, and she was going to do it until she had something so complete and so well organized that no attorney in the state of Ohio could look at it and call it frivolous. She opened a notebook. On the first page, she wrote the date, January 6, 2014. She wrote down everything she knew, everything she had seen, everything she could verify, bank statements, transfer records, dates and amounts, the name of Marcus's attorney, the content of his letter, the names of the two employees who had been in the office when she worked there, who had heard her described as a partner, who had seen her build the systems the company still ran on. She printed out the emails from the shared business account, all of them, going back to 2011, and organized them by date. She printed the voicemail transcripts, including one from the spring of 2012 in which Marcus, in a message left for a prospective client, had referred to Claire by name as his business partner. She kept the originals in a physical binder. She kept digital copies in an encrypted folder. She had a key to a safety deposit box at a bank across town, and she put a copy of everything in there too. Then she closed the binder, put it in the closet, and went back to her life. Over the next 2 years, Claire did things that looked, from the outside, entirely like a woman moving forward. She got a promotion at work, then another. She enrolled in night classes through a paralegal certification program, not because she planned to become a paralegal, but because she wanted to understand the legal system she was preparing to use. She completed the program in 18 months while working full-time. She then began pursuing an MBA at a state school, again part-time, again while working full-time. Her friends saw a woman who had gone through something hard and come out of it driven, sharper, more focused. What they did not see, because she was careful about what she showed, was the binder, the ongoing documentation. The habit she had developed of checking the public business filing records every few months, watching the company Marcus had built with her money grow larger and more profitable, updating her records with every new development. She was not obsessed. That is an important distinction. She did not spend her evenings consumed by what he had done. She lived her life fully, genuinely, with real joy and real connection and real forward momentum. But she also kept the binder current, and she kept the faith that the day was coming. In 2015, Marcus's consultancy landed its biggest client to date, a regional healthcare company that brought in a retainer worth 6 figures annually. Claire noted this in her file. In 2016, he moved the company's offices from a co-working space to a standalone suite in a professional building on the east side of Columbus. Claire noted this too. In 2017, she completed her MBA and was recruited by a litigation finance firm, a company that funds civil lawsuits in exchange for a portion of the eventual recovery, as a case analyst. This was not an accident. She had looked for that job specifically because she understood that the greatest single obstacle between her and a successful claim was the cost of sustained litigation, and she wanted to understand from the inside how cases like hers were evaluated, funded, and won. She spent 3 years there. She learned things that most people who end up in civil court never know going in. She understood discovery strategy. She understood how defendants think when they realize the other side is serious. She understood what a well-prepared plaintiff looks like to a judge. And all the while, Marcus was living his life. He sold the consultancy in a partial acquisition deal in 2019. Not the whole company, just a significant stake. And the deal was reported in a local business publication, complete with a quote from Marcus about the journey from scrappy startup to established firm. Claire read the article. She calculated what $47,000 compounded as an equity stake from 2011 would have been worth at that valuation. The number was not small. She added the article to the binder. In 2020, Marcus and Vanessa got engaged. They announced it on social media. Photos from a rooftop in Chicago, matching smiles, a ring that looked expensive. Claire saw the announcement. She did not comment. She did not react publicly in any way. She simply noted it and moved on. And then, in the spring of 2024, she received, through a mutual acquaintance who had remained friendly with both of them over the years, an invitation to their wedding. Now, here is what you need to understand about that invitation, and what Claire did with it, because this is the moment where the story becomes the story. She did not receive the invitation and immediately decide to do something dramatic. She received it, and she sat with it. She thought about it. She talked to Patricia, who was still her attorney, who had never formally filed anything but had been advising Claire periodically for years as the documentation grew and the strategy became clearer. And she said, "I think it is time." Patricia agreed. The case they had been building, quietly, over the course of a decade, was now strong enough. The business's growth and profitability made the damages meaningful. The discovery process, if the case went to full litigation, would compel the production of internal documents that Patricia was confident would corroborate Claire's claims. And there was one more thing, a detail that Claire had uncovered in 2018 while doing her own research through the state's business filing database. The company's internal accounting records from 2012, filed as part of a state small business grant application, listed Claire's $47,000 contribution under a category called Partner Capital Contribution. Not a gift, not a loan, partner capital contribution. Marcus's own accountants, filing his own paperwork for his own grant application, had called her a partner. Patricia filed the civil complaint in May of 2024, 2 weeks before the wedding. The complaint alleged fraudulent misrepresentation, unjust enrichment, and breach of implied partnership agreement. It named Marcus Hayes as the defendant. It was 91 pages long, with exhibits. It sought recovery of the original $47,000, plus a percentage of the business value attributable to the contributions she had made, plus interest calculated from 2012 forward. The total damages claimed were well into 6 figures. Marcus's attorney received notice of the filing. Marcus received notice. The case entered the court system. And none of this was visible on Claire's face when she RSVP'd yes to the wedding. She got her hair done the morning of the wedding. She wore a green dress she had bought 3 years earlier and never worn. She drove to the vineyard outside Columbus, where the ceremony was being held, found her seat at table 11, and sat down. She ate the salmon. She made small talk with the couple at her left, who were old college friends of Vanessa's from Indiana. She watched Marcus and Vanessa exchange vows in the garden at 6 o'clock on a warm June evening, and she sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her face was completely still. She was not angry. She was not triumphant. She was, by her own later account, simply present, watching a man who had stolen from her get married, while the legal machinery she had spent a decade quietly assembling turned for the first time in real motion. His attorney had received the complaint weeks earlier. Marcus had known it was coming. What he apparently had not anticipated was that it would be filed before the wedding rather than after, and what he could not have known, because she had told no one, was that Claire would be sitting in the back of his wedding reception at table 11, watching the whole thing. She left the reception at 9:15. She drove home. She changed out of the green dress. She called Destiny, the college roommate who had been one of the only people who knew the full story from beginning to end, and she talked for about 20 minutes. Then she went to sleep. The following morning, she went to work. The legal process continued. Marcus's attorney initially characterized the case as baseless and filed a motion to dismiss on the grounds that the absence of a formal partnership agreement made the implied partnership claim too speculative to survive. The judge denied the motion. In the discovery phase that followed, both sides were required to produce documents. Marcus's company produced its internal accounting records, its email archives, its grant application files. And there it was, in the government filing from 2012. Partner capital contribution, $47,000. There, in the email archive, were 37 separate messages between 2011 and 2013, in which Marcus referred to Claire as his partner, in communications with clients, with vendors, with a bank loan officer, with a commercial landlord. There, in a deposition conducted that fall, was one of the two original employees confirming that Claire had been known internally as co-founder from the beginning of the company. The employee said, under oath, that Marcus had introduced her that way at the first all-hands meeting, that the systems she built were still in use years later, that her fingerprints were on the operation in ways that could not be undone by leaving her name off the incorporation papers. The deposition of Marcus himself was described by Patricia later as one of the more remarkable she had conducted in her career, not because of what he said, but because of the way the documentation closed every exit he tried to take. Every time he offered an alternative explanation for a piece of evidence, there was another piece of evidence that made that explanation impossible. He said the $47,000 was a loan he had always intended to repay. Patricia produced the email in which he told a client she was his equity partner. He said that email had been a simplification, not a legal statement. Patricia produced the grant application with the accounting entry. He said the accounting entry had been his accountant's error. Patricia produced a follow-up email from 2013 in which Marcus had reviewed the grant application before submission and replied, "Looks good, send it." He said he had not noticed that particular line item. Patricia moved on. She had been waiting 10 years for this conversation, and she was in absolutely no hurry. The case settled in the spring of 2025. The settlement terms are sealed, as civil settlements often are, and neither party can speak to the specific amount. What is publicly on record is a voluntary dismissal with prejudice, meaning the case was resolved to the satisfaction of both parties in a manner that permanently concluded the litigation. Patricia, in a filing related to attorney fees, described the outcome as fully satisfactory to her client. A person familiar with the settlement, speaking without attribution, said the amount was substantial and included interest. Marcus has not spoken publicly about the case. Vanessa has not spoken publicly about the case. Their social media presence, which had been regularly updated through the wedding and into early 2025, went quiet around the time the settlement was finalized. Claire, for her part, did not post anything, did not write anything, did not give any interviews. She went to dinner with Destiny the night after the settlement was signed, at a restaurant in the short north, and they ordered 2 glasses of wine and steak and creme brulee for dessert, and Destiny asked her how she felt, and Claire thought about it for a moment and said, "Done." That was the word she used. Not victorious, not vindicated, not relieved. Done. Like putting down something heavy you have been carrying for a long time. Like the last page of a book you knew was going to end this way, but needed to read all the way through regardless. There are things about this story that are difficult to talk about without being reductive, because the temptation, when you tell a story that ends with a woman recovering what was taken from her, is to make it a simple story about justice, a wrong righted, a villain punished, a hero triumphant. But Claire's story is not quite that clean, and I do not think she would want it to be told that way. What she did for 11 years was not primarily about Marcus. Yes, she wanted the money back. Yes, she wanted the record corrected. But what she was really doing, she has said to the people closest to her, was refusing to let the worst thing that happened to her become the defining thing about her. She could have spent those 11 years in bitterness. She could have spent them in ongoing rage, constantly monitoring what Marcus was doing, letting his success be a wound she kept reopening. She chose not to. She chose to grow, to become better at her work, to become more knowledgeable about the system she was preparing to use, to build a life that was genuinely hers, fully and completely, while also quietly, methodically, patiently preparing to collect what was owed. The outcome was a consequence of who she had become in the process of pursuing it, not the other way around. There are also difficult questions here about trust and what happens when you give it fully to someone who does not deserve it. Claire has said that the hardest part of the whole experience was not the loss of the money and not even the betrayal itself. The hardest part was the period, in the early months after it ended, when she questioned her own judgment so completely that she could not trust herself. When she looked back at every moment she had chosen to believe him and wondered whether she had been naive, whether she had missed obvious signs, whether a smarter or more careful person would have seen through him earlier. She has said that the answer she eventually arrived at, and it took years to get there, was no. She had not been naive. She had been trusting. And there is a difference. Naive is not knowing that the world contains people who will use your trust against you. Trusting is knowing that it does, and choosing to extend it anyway because the alternative, a life lived behind walls, a heart kept permanently safe by being kept permanently closed, is not a life she was willing to live. She had trusted the wrong person. That was his failure, not hers. It had just taken her 11 years and $47,000 and 91 pages of legal complaint to make that case compellingly enough for a court to agree. She was smiling at his wedding, but she was not smiling about the wedding. She was smiling about the notebook she had opened 10 years earlier and filled, page by patient page, with everything he had done. She was smiling about the grant application with the accounting entry he had never thought to look for. She was smiling about Patricia, who had spent a decade advising her and had been waiting just as long for the day she could walk that case into a courtroom. She was smiling because she had known, for years, exactly how this was going to end, and she had simply been waiting for him to get to the place she had already been standing. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer in the comments below. If you had been Claire, sitting at that kitchen table in December of 2013, holding a letter from an attorney telling you that your $47,000 had been classified as a gift, would you have fought? Or would you have decided that the cost was too high, the road too long, the outcome too uncertain? There is no wrong answer. The question is worth sitting with, because the answer tells you something about yourself that a lot of people spend their whole lives not knowing. And maybe, the next time someone asks you to trust them without paperwork, without a written agreement, without documentation, you will think about Claire, and you will ask for the paper. If this story moved you, affected you, made you think about someone you know or something you have been through, share it. Send it to a friend. Leave a comment below telling us what part of this story hit you hardest, because every time we post a video like this, the comment section becomes a conversation that goes places we could not have taken it alone. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button right now, because we have more stories coming.